I'm Eliza, and I never imagined the day would come when my own stepfather would try to erase me from my mother's life. Right in front of a room full of people, sitting in the cold leather chairs of a lawyer's office. Just 3 weeks after we buried my mother, Camille, I sat in that office, still raw with grief, when Malcolm, her husband of just 4 years, turned to me with venom in his voice and said, "She gets nothing. I made sure of it." He didn't flinch, he didn't hesitate, and he didn't care who was watching. For a moment, the room went silent, the kind of silence where even the air feels heavier. My heart pounded in my chest, my palms were cold. But before I could even respond, something unexpected happened. The lawyer, my mother's old friend, let out a soft, almost disbelieving chuckle. And that's when I knew something wasn't adding up. But before I tell you what happened next, you need to understand something. My mother wasn't just a parent, she was a powerhouse. A woman who taught herself to code in the early 90s when tech was still a boys' club, and women were more often asked to take notes than lead meetings. She didn't come from money or privilege. She came from grit. From a line of women who worked with their hands, made meals from scratch, and never let someone else define their worth. I was just a kid when she left her high-paying job at a major tech firm and started her own cybersecurity company, Stonehaven Systems, from our one-car garage. I remember the day we set up her first server. I didn't know what it did, but I knew the sound of her laugh as she plugged in those cables. That laugh, the one that only came when she was chasing her purpose, stayed with me my entire life. We didn't have much in those early days. Our meals were often microwaved and our clothes came from discount racks. But Friday nights? They were sacred. That was our time. Ice cream sundaes. Classic black and white films. She called it our mandatory joy ritual. No matter how tired she was, she never missed a Friday. By the time I turned 16, everything changed. Stonehaven took off. My mother's brilliance finally got the recognition it deserved. Fortune 500 companies were licensing her systems. Journalists were writing about her in Forbes and Wired. She bought us a new home in a gated community, big, beautiful, and quiet. She finally got to exhale. For the first time, she could enjoy the fruits of everything she'd built. And then, Malcolm walked into our lives. He showed up at a tech charity gala she was sponsoring, a smooth-talking investment advisor with silver at his temples and a smile like a champagne glass. Elegant, cold, and crystal clear. He told her she was incredible, said she deserved to rest, to let others take the reins. He took her to art galleries and jazz clubs, bought her thoughtful gifts, made her feel adored. At first, I was relieved. She had poured so much of herself into building Stonehaven and raising me. Maybe this was the joy she finally earned. Malcolm tried to bond with me too, gave me books about pioneering women in science, asked about my college goals, complimented my mother's strength every chance he got. But behind his charm, I saw something else. A flicker in his eyes when he thought no one was watching. The way he looked around our home, at her things. Not like someone admiring beauty, but like a man taking inventory. I mentioned it to my aunt once. She brushed it off, said I was being too protective. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was just scared of losing my place in my mother's new chapter. But in my gut, I felt it. Malcolm wasn't just loving her. He was positioning himself. And as I'd learned too late, the storm had already begun. At first, everything seemed perfect. Malcolm was attentive, polished, and always said the right thing at the right time. He took Camille on weekend trips, sent her handwritten notes, and told her she was the most brilliant woman he'd ever met. She glowed in his presence. I wanted to believe he was exactly who he pretended to be. After all, hadn't she earned this kind of love? But even in those early days, there were signs. Small cracks. barely visible at first, but growing. He began showing up at Stonehaven's board meetings, not as a guest, but as if he belonged there. He'd stand quietly in the back, arms crossed, observing everyone like he was appraising a company he might one day own. Camille laughed it off. "He's just curious," she told me. "He wants to understand what I built." Still, I noticed the way he spoke to her behind closed doors. Soft at first, but patronizing. "You don't need to stress about every detail anymore," he'd say, refilling her wine glass before she could protest. "You've done enough, love. Let others take care of the hard stuff now." And slowly, she began to believe him. Within months of their wedding, things began to shift. My mother started pulling back from her own company. She reduced her hours. She gave her vice presidents more autonomy. She even changed the locks on her office at home, something she'd never done before. That summer, when I came home from college, everything looked different. Our once cozy house had turned cold and clinical. Camille's warm, earthy furniture had been replaced with modern glass pieces. Our family photos were gone, replaced by abstract art I knew she didn't choose. It felt like a hotel someone else had decorated. And Malcolm? He was everywhere. Every dinner, every phone call, every visit. When I tried to make plans with my mother, he'd always interrupt. "Oh, Camille's resting. She's got an event. We'll have to reschedule." I began to feel like a guest in my own family, like the walls around her had slowly thickened, and I was on the outside now. But I didn't say anything. I didn't want to sound jealous or ungrateful. My mother kept telling me she was happy, and I so badly wanted to believe her. Then came the call that shattered everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Rain drizzled down my office windows. I was buried in lines of code when her name flashed on my screen. My heart skipped. "Eliza," she said, her voice steadier than I expected. "I need to tell you something. The doctors, they found a mass. It's pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The room spun. "I've already started treatment," she said quickly. "Don't worry about me. Malcolm's handling everything. I'm in good hands." But I didn't trust those hands. I drove to their house that night. I needed to see her, to hold her, to hear the truth with my own ears. Malcolm opened the door. His face was tight. "She's resting," he said, blocking the entrance. "You should have called." "She's my mother," I replied, fighting to keep my voice calm. "I don't need an invitation." He paused, then stepped aside. 10 minutes. Upstairs, she looked fragile. Pale skin, sunken eyes, wrapped in soft blankets on their massive bed. But when she saw me, her whole face changed. She smiled, a real smile, for the first time in weeks. I sat beside her, held her hand. We spoke in whispers. Malcolm hovered in the doorway like a shadow, chiming in every so often with updates about treatments and travel plans to specialists in New York. But I could see the tension in her jaw, the way her eyes flicked toward him when she spoke, the way she chose her words carefully. He had her surrounded, but even in her weakened state, I knew Camille hadn't given up, and the moment that confirmed it came one early morning when I caught her alone. She took my hand and whispered, "Talk to Gideon Lang, the lawyer. You remember him?" I nodded. She squeezed my fingers gently. "Trust Gideon, no matter what Malcolm says." Her voice was hoarse. Her eyes flicked to the door again. And then she changed the subject. But I knew what she was really saying. She was preparing for something. Something big. Something Malcolm wasn't supposed to see coming. The day of the will reading arrived with a kind of quiet weight pressing down on my shoulders. The sky was overcast. Gray, still, almost expectant. I arrived 15 minutes early to Gideon Lang's office, clutching the edge of my coat. my palms already sweating. I didn't know what to expect. I only knew one thing. Camille had told me to trust Gideon, and that alone gave me strength. The waiting room was already crowded. My Aunt Miriam sat beside her husband in muted black. Two of my mom's oldest colleagues from Stonehaven nodded solemnly when they saw me. Even some of her childhood friends had flown in from out of state. But the last to arrive, of course, was Malcolm. He swept in wearing a navy suit, flanked by two sharply dressed men. His financial advisors, I presumed. His expression? Confident, cold. As if this was just another business meeting. He barely looked at me. He sat across the room and leaned into his advisors, whispering something with a smirk. Every now and then his eyes flicked to me with the faintest hint of mockery. And in that moment, I felt the full weight of his arrogance. He thought he'd already won. We were ushered into Gideon's conference room, wood-paneled walls, brass sconces, and the comforting scent of old paper and leather. Camille had known this place well. It felt safe, grounded. Gideon entered the room with a thick folder in his hands. His expression was calm, gentle, and respectful. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "Today, we are here to honor the last wishes of Camille Taylor Rowe, a woman I had the privilege of knowing for over 2 decades. Not just as a client, but as a dear friend." Malcolm cleared his throat, interrupting. "With all due respect, Gideon, we're all grieving, but some of us have other appointments. Perhaps we can get to the main assets?" The room shifted uncomfortably, but Gideon, ever composed, nodded once. "Of course. Let's proceed." He began reading the will aloud, starting with the smaller bequests, each one thoughtful and deeply personal. A $10,000 scholarship fund in Camille's name at her alma mater. A beloved painting gifted to her sister. Her first edition book collection donated to the city library she had once spent hours studying in as a young woman. With each item, Gideon read the note Camille had written to accompany it. I watched Malcolm closely. He was growing agitated. He fidgeted, checked his watch. His advisors whispered nervously. Finally, he snapped. "This is all very sweet," he said with a forced chuckle. "But can we skip the trinkets and get to the estate?" Camille updated her will before she passed. I was there when she signed it. She left everything to me. My attorneys will confirm this. Gideon paused, setting down the will. Then, to everyone's astonishment, he laughed. A short, quiet, incredulous sound. "Malcolm," he said, his voice calm, "I'm not sure what document you believe you saw, but this," he held up the folder, "is Camille's valid, signed, and witnessed last will and testament, executed 6 months before her diagnosis, and it is not the only document we'll be reviewing today." The room stilled. Gideon reached for a second folder, thicker, sealed in legal tape. He cracked it open and pulled out a notarized binder. "This is the Camille Taylor Living Trust, established 14 months ago, before her diagnosis, before she stepped back from Stonehaven. It outlines the transfer of her major assets, including her 70% stake in the company, personal investments, and estate property." Malcolm's face drained of color. "What? What trust?" "It's an irrevocable trust," Gideon explained, "meaning once it was created, the assets placed inside it could not be removed, even by Camille herself. And as it was formed prior to her marriage to you, it was her legal right to do so." I sat there frozen, processing every word. She had planned this. While Malcolm was parading her to dinner parties and convincing her to give up control of her life, she was already building a safeguard. Quietly, intelligently, deliberately. He was too stunned to speak. But when he finally found his voice, it was nothing but rage. "This is fraud. She never told me about any of this. I'm her husband." "And as her husband," Gideon said coolly. You do receive something. Her share of joint property accumulated during your marriage, a vacation home in Lake Tahoe, a few joint accounts totaling approximately $800,000, and a one-time payment of $500,000. But the company, Malcolm choked, the house, her legacy, all held in trust, Gideon said. And the primary beneficiary? He turned to me, meeting my stunned gaze with soft conviction. Eliza Taylor. My heart beat louder than the silence that followed. She had done it. My mother had outplayed the man who tried to erase me, and this was only the beginning. Malcolm didn't walk out of that room quietly. Number. The man who once wined and dined my mother, who whispered compliments and wore sophistication like armor, cracked wide open the moment Gideon finished reading the trust. He stood abruptly, face flushed, his voice trembling with disbelief. This is fraud. Camille never told me she was planning this. She hid money from her husband. That's illegal. That's manipulation. But Gideon was unshaken. Everything was done legally, transparently, and well before her diagnosis. She had the mental clarity. The documents were notarized, witnessed, logged, and filed properly. And I have no doubt, Mr. Rowe, that she knew exactly what she was doing, and exactly who she was protecting herself from. Malcolm stormed out of the office with his advisors scurrying behind him, but that wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. Within days, legal documents began flying in like a storm. Malcolm's lawyers challenged the trust, accusing Gideon of coercion, me of manipulation, Camille of being too ill to make sound decisions. It was wild, grasping, and desperate. But Camille had prepared for that too. Every step of the way, my mother had documented what was happening. She'd kept journals, emails, recordings, and she'd hired a private investigator 3 months before her diagnosis. What he uncovered was horrifying. Malcolm had a pattern. He had previously married 2 older, financially secure women. Both marriages ended quickly. Both women had signed non-disclosure agreements during their divorces, but the investigator found the paper trail: financial records, real estate transfers, offshore accounts. It became clear that Malcolm had been targeting women like my mother for years. And Camille? She figured it out before she ever got sick. Gideon showed me the journal entries, notes from Camille written in her exact looping script. He says I've earned peace, but every time I relax, he steps further into my company. Found him reading my financial statements again today. Told me he was just curious. Eliza is right. There's something off. I need to protect what I've built. She wrote that months before her diagnosis. She had seen the truth. And instead of confronting him outright, which might have tipped him off, she built a defense around herself and her legacy so carefully that even he didn't see it until it was too late. But the ugliest moment came not in court, not on paper, but inside the house I grew up in. I had returned with Gideon, a locksmith, and a sheriff's deputy. Legally, I was entitled to collect personal property listed in the trust, my mother's jewelry, photographs, letters. But Malcolm had changed the locks. He'd cut off my access, claimed I was trespassing. The deputy knocked. Long minutes passed. Then Malcolm opened the door. He looked nothing like the man my mother married, disheveled, stubbled, eyes bloodshot. "What is this?" he growled. The deputy spoke calmly, presenting the documents. "You're still allowed to live here for the remainder of the 90-day period, but the trust allows the beneficiary access to all inventoried items." Malcolm stepped back, seething. "Fine. Take your precious little trinkets." Inside, the house felt hollow, like something sacred had been violated. Camille's warmth was gone, her photos replaced with soulless art, her books boxed up, her scent scrubbed from every surface. We moved from room to room, checking items off the list. But when we reached her old bedroom closet, where she used to keep her most personal things, the safe was wide open. Empty. I turned to Malcolm. "Where's the jewelry? My grandmother's ring? It's all listed here." He shrugged, eyes cold. "I have no idea what you're talking about." But I saw the twitch in his jaw, the flick of his eyes toward his own room. When Gideon and the deputy stepped away to examine a missing painting, I took my chance. I went into Malcolm's closet, opened the nightstand drawer, and there it was, a leather pouch. Inside, my grandmother's diamond ring, the one Camille had promised would be mine. He saw me holding it and lost control. "That was a gift," he shouted. "She gave it to me. She wanted me to have it." "You're lying," I said quietly. "She listed this in the trust inventory. This was mine." He lunged at me. The deputy stepped in, grabbing Malcolm's arm and pushing him back as he screamed. "You're just like her, so superior. She was nothing before me, nothing." And just like that, the mask shattered. Gone was the elegant businessman. What stood before me now was a predator exposed, a man who had tried to control my mother's legacy, and lost. After the confrontation, after the ring, the shouting, and the sheriff escorting Malcolm from the house, a strange kind of stillness settled over everything. Not peace, not yet, but something like the first deep breath after holding one in for too long. Camille was gone. That was still true. That ache hadn't lessened. But the fear, that gnawing, helpless fear I had felt for months, was gone too. Now, there was work to do. Over the following days, we discovered the full extent of Malcolm's deception. He had been selling items from the house, artwork, jewelry, furniture that belonged to the trust. He'd used Camille's logins in an attempt to access Stonehaven's financial records, but her security systems had locked him out before he could do any real damage. But even his attempt was enough. Combined with the private investigator's reports, the recordings, and his outburst in front of law enforcement, the legal walls closed in quickly. The court upheld Camille's trust completely. They issued a restraining order preventing Malcolm from coming within 500 feet of any trust property. His personal accounts were frozen pending investigation. And when the court-appointed trustee accessed his home office, they found a hidden safe. Inside was everything Camille had warned us about: ledgers tracking her net worth, spreadsheets with projections of her company's valuation, handwritten notes mapping out his 5-year plan to isolate and absorb her life. There were even mock drafts of letters he'd written on her behalf, preemptively cutting ties with friends and family he'd deemed distractions. It was chilling, like reading a blueprint for psychological erosion, and Camille had beaten him at his own game. I moved back into the family home shortly after the court finalized the rulings. It didn't feel like home at first. Too many pieces of him still clung to the walls: the cold modern decor, the impersonal lighting, the furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum, not a family living room. So, I started undoing it all. I repainted the walls in the colors Camille loved: soft greens, warm golds, honeyed creams. I dug through the storage and rehung the photos Malcolm had removed. Me as a child on her shoulders, her holding a prototype from her early Stonehaven days. Our smiling, messy Friday movie nights. Friends and family came to help. We cooked meals together, listened to Camille's favorite music, and slowly filled the house with life again. "This is what she would have wanted," my Aunt Miriam said one night, as we lit a candle and placed a photo of Camille in the foyer. "She always said a home should tell your story, not someone else's." I didn't just inherit her home, or her wealth. I inherited her purpose. With the help of Gideon and the board at Stonehaven, I created the Camille Taylor Foundation for Women in Technology, a scholarship and mentorship initiative for young women interested in coding, cybersecurity, and tech entrepreneurship. We structured it to fund education, startup grants, and networking programs for women who, like Camille, had vision but no connections, grit but no roadmap. This should be built to last generations, Gideon told me during one of our planning meetings, because Camille didn't just want to leave behind wealth, she wanted to leave behind movement. And she did. Stonehaven continues to thrive under the team Camille appointed. I chose not to step in as CEO. That wasn't my journey. But I took a seat on the board where I could protect her legacy and keep the company aligned with her values. Gideon also gave me something else. Letters, written by Camille, sealed, each marked for a different time in my life. The final letter came on the 1-year anniversary of her passing. We had just held a celebration of her life in the newly restored house. Friends, colleagues, students she had mentored. We shared stories, laughed, cried. It felt like home again. That night, Gideon handed me the letter. Camille's handwriting on the envelope was soft and familiar. "My darling Eliza," it began, "if you're reading this, then a year has passed. You've survived the worst part. You're beginning again. And I need you to know something. What I built in my lifetime was never about money. It was about you. About watching you grow into someone brave, curious, and strong. You are my greatest achievement, my proudest work. Trust yourself. You were right about him, and you'll be right again. All my love, Mom." I pressed the letter to my chest and cried, not because I was sad, though I missed her with everything I had, but because I finally felt the full truth of her love. Camille hadn't just outsmarted Malcolm. She had protected me. She had built something that would last. And in doing so, she had turned the quiet strength she always carried into a roar that would echo for generations. He tried to erase me, but she wrote me into every line of her legacy. And now, it's my turn to carry it forward. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Have you ever trusted someone who turned out to be someone else entirely? I'd truly love to hear your story. Drop it in the comments below. And if this journey touched your heart or reminded you of someone who needs to hear it, please hit like, subscribe, and share it forward. Thank you for being here. And always remember, some battles are won not with noise, but with quiet strength.